resume.
Mr. Tyzek is next, Mr. Commissioner.
For the record, Boris Tyzek for the province of British Columbia. Mr. Commissioner, I'm expressing some time concerns. The province was advised through some exchanges of correspondence a while ago that Commission Council would not be producing any economic data for this panel. As the socio-economic interests are important to the province, we felt that it would be necessary to provide some of that. We've estimated that would be 30 to 45 minutes worth. I can try to make that as quickly as possible, but I am concerned in some areas. We have because we've got Mr. Morley here, and I would be proposing to introduce the Gislason report, which deals with the economic impacts on ITQs. Having him here to deal with that and have you hear it would be of great, I think would benefit, given over the last 2 days we've heard a lot about ITQs. We also have some concerns about MSc certification. So I'm concerned for my colleagues because I don't want to cut them out, but it's clear that we try to limit our appearances here in terms of cross to what are really provincial interests, and the socioeconomic benefits of the fishery and the sockeye salmon fishery are of prime importance to the province and to all British Columbians.
I just want to get some time estimate from you, Mr. Tyzek, to do that.
I mean, if we just dealt with the Gislason report and MSc certification, we might get that done. I have some concern about just getting some exhibits in which are just data, and because I've gone over it with Mr. Morley, these just show what the landed value and the catches have been for the last 20 years to give you a basis in a graph. So there's a bunch I could rush through there, but the real key would be to get that evidence from him.
Certainly, I'm just trying to get some general surround on how much time you think.
Well, I could probably, we went half an hour.
All right. Well, why don't we do that then?
All right. Thank you. Would just like to Mr. Lunn, if you can pull up these exhibits and we'll just get them down there. And this would be the BC Seafood Industry in Review for 1993, 1996, 2000, 2004, and 2007. Mr. Morley, you've looked at these. These are all documents that are produced by the Ministry of Agriculture, Fishery and Foods. You're familiar with these?
Yes, I am.
All right. Could we get these marked as an exhibit, Mr. Giles, in whatever way you would see fit?
1993 document. 93, 504, 96, 505, 2004.
2000.
Oh, pardon me. Oh, 2000.
Yes.
2000 will be 506. Did you have more?
And 2007 would be the 1993 one. If you turn to page 2 of that, Mr. Lund, please. And if you highlight the table, the first part of it, which just deals with salmon. What this shows, it's got 3 columns: wholesale value, landed value, and landings for 3 years. And the second line there is sockeye. Now, if I read this correctly, it shows that the landings in 1993 were 42 million for sockeye, 92, 21, and in 1991, 25.5 million.
Yeah, I think they're in thousands of tons.
Oh, sorry,
42,000 tons,
yeah,
21,000 tons, and 25,000.
And 25,000 tons. And the landed value on that is
In 1991 was 84.6 million, 92 was 110.4 million, and 1993 was 139.8 million.
Now, the wholesale value, how is that different from the landed value?
Wholesale value would be the value of the products leaving the processing plant. So they would be canned salmon, fresh and frozen salmon, salmon caviar.
Now, would those, the wholesale value, would that include just BC caught fish, or would it include imports?
Since these numbers come from reports filed by all the fish processors in BC, there are some salmon that are imported in BC from Alaska for further processing, and the wholesale value would include that production as well.
So what would be the sort of the ratio between landed value and the wholesale value of BC salmon on an average?
A general rule of thumb has been sort of the wholesale value is kind of almost double the landed value is sort of been a rule of thumb over the years. Certainly that's in sockeye, for fresh and frozen sockeye, it wouldn't be quite double. But for canned salmon, it certainly is double.
Okay. Thank you. For the sake of expediency, Mr. Commissioner, if you were to look at the ones 1996, 2000, 2004, 2007, they have those same graphs there with the same 3-year comparison, which would give you then a good perspective on the salmon catches and the landed value and the wholesale value from 1993 through to 2007. Mr. Morley, you've looked at those, and what's been the general trend?
Well, the sockeye production in there that we look at is probably 3/4 from the Fraser River sockeye over the course of those. Certainly, in the 1990s, it has been a slightly smaller proportion in the 2000s. But the numbers show a dramatic decline, where you see the landed value of sockeye being in the hundreds of millions of dollars down to being more in the tens of millions of dollars. So it's been a huge decline over that time period.
And if we could now go to Mr. Lunn, on the letter we sent out, number 7, which is number 13 on the letter we sent, BC commercial sockeye harvest and value 1990 to 2010. That's that graph, yes. If you look at that graph, and there's a table that follows, does this then, in your experience, accurately reflect the plight of Fraser, of commercial sockeye salmon harvest?
Yes, I think this takes the numbers from these that were in the reports previously and puts them on a graph, so it indicates again that large decline from the 1990s into the 2000s as the escapement was sent more up the river, and as we saw sort of declining access for the commercial fishery. Up until 2010, where you see the fact that we managed to have a significant fishery, that we have come back to an estimate here of over $90 million in terms of landed value, at least a preliminary estimate that's been put forward.
And if you turn the page, you've got tables which reflect those. If we go to the next page of that exhibit, we've got tables which reflect that.
That's correct,
Yeah.
yes.
May I get this marked as the next exhibit, please?
Exhibit 508.
508. The next document that I would like to bring up is number 14, Mr. Lunn, of the letter. And this is the report. It's called Employment Impacts of ITQ Fisheries in Pacific Canada, prepared for DFO by Gislason and Associates. This is the report that you had referred to earlier in your testimony this afternoon?
This is one of the reports. He also has a more recent report out from 2010, which has a number of other things which I think would also be of interest to the Commission, but you don't have that one here today. So.
No, we don't. Thank you. And if we could turn to the first page. And under introduction, and the second bullet there, given the testimony we heard today, you would agree with the second bullet, which says ITQ management of Pacific fisheries in Canada has been controversial in that in an attempt to improve economic viability, such programs can reduce the employment base?
There's no question that the number of crew jobs in the industry can and is normally reduced when an ITQ program is brought in. In terms of other employment in the economy, the income, depending on how it's spent, can in fact generate more income and more employment in the economy in other sectors.
And we'll get to that part of the study. If we go down to the fourth bullet, this indicates that the study refers to 6 case study fisheries in Pacific Canada, and they are halibut, sablefish, groundfish trawl, gooey duck, red sea urchin, and the RAF troll Chinook salmon.
That's correct.
Focuses on ITQ impacts for the year 2005 in the third bullet under approach and methodology. And then under the last bullet on that page, Mr. Lunn, it talks about some of the impact measures, including employment expressed in person years, wages and salaries, community impact indicators. And then it goes on the next page to indicate how the information was collected. Now, before going to the results or lessons learned, if we could go to Roman numeral 6. Yes, that's it. So if we can expand that a bit. This is a summary of the employment-related impacts. Mr. Commissioner, if you turn to the table of contents on the next page, you will see that there's a case study for each of the various groups that has been referred to. And what I'm doing here, for the interest of time, is just focusing on the summary that comes from each of those case studies. And what is interesting, if we really want to get down to it, they've got the case studies going across the page, and if you go down to the bottom third, which says 2005 ITQ impacts, Mr. Lunn, if we could go down to that part of it and expand that. Yes, from there on, yes. So this is the, in looking at the various fisheries and the analysis that they did, these are results that Mr. Gislason found. And for halibut, what do you see coming from those results?
I take it halibut is the first column.
Yeah, it's the first column.
That would show that the wages declined by 780,000. The person years of employment increased by 28. The number of vessels active in the fishery reduced by 139, and the number of crew jobs reduced by 665.
Yeah, and the reduction in the number of rural licenses was 2%.
Yeah, which is almost nothing.
Almost nothing, and an increase in the process value and an increase in the catch.
That's right.
Now, if you were to go then over to the groundfish trawl, which is the third column over.
You'll see there that the processed value increased by almost $50 million. The wages increased by almost 16 million. The employment person years increased by 280. The active vessels increased by 12, and the crew jobs increased by 48, and the number of rural license increased by 1%.
Yeah. And if you were to take a look across the board at those, depending on the fishery, you will see that the active vessels, for the most part, decreased across them. Crew jobs, save for the GF trawl, well, there was a minor increase in red urchin, but there was a loss in crew jobs across the board.
Yes.
Yeah. And in wages, there was an increase in 4 of the 6. There was a decrease in halibut and RAF Chinook, but in others there was an increase in the wages for the crews.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And in every case there was an increase in employment in person years.
Yes.
All right. So if we want to go back now to the, on this, if we go back now, Mr. Lyon, if we could, to Roman numeral page 3. And we go to results. The study here indicates that the impetus for moving to ITQs for the case study fisheries had several common features. If you look at those, are those things that in your experience and knowledge of those fisheries seem to...
That's correct. Each
Right.
of those fisheries exhibited some of those common features, yes.
The inability to fish within a fleet-wide TAC, inherent unstable industry,
Yes,
excessive amount of capital labor and operating costs.
yes.
Okay. Now, if we go down to the summary results, which we talked about, at the bottom bullet there, as we've said, that all fisheries show an increase in the industry product value under ITQs, and we saw that from the table.
Yes, for
Yes.
sure.
And as we saw, most
Most fisheries show an increase in
Yeah.
wages and person-year employment.
now, there are two other results here that are of some interest, and the second bullet on the page, Roman numeral page 4, Mr. Lund, please. ITQ management has resulted in much better science and data from dockside monitoring programs and other endeavors.
Yes, in fact, many of these groups have invested money in additional science projects to support DFO science.
And the two bullets after that, ITQ fisheries management has allowed better quality products to be produced over a much longer season, which has enabled higher returns to both fishermen and processors.
That's correct in the fisheries that they looked at here, yes.
Okay. In terms of the lessons learned, you've read over these, and what are your general comments over these lessons?
My general comments are that, as I indicated previously, a number of the concerns that have been raised by groups and opposed to implementation of ITQs were addressed in this report and analyzed in the ones that have been implemented, and those concerns turned out to be unfounded, and in fact that the benefit, although there was a few places where the number of crew jobs may have declined, the incomes that were derived from the jobs that were there afterwards were much higher than the ones that had been there previously, and they were better jobs and more sustainable, and that the actual total income to fishermen and processors increased substantially in all of these fisheries. And that the concerns about a shifting in ownership from rural to urban areas, again, was unfounded. It does not happen in these fisheries.
Well, yes, if you go to lesson 9 on page Roman numeral 5, it indicates commercial fishing license under ITQ fisheries management do not necessarily gravitate to interest in large urban centers at the expense of rural interests.
That's correct, yes.
And lesson 10, and perhaps this one, it's difficult to analyze the employment, wage, and community impacts of ITQs in isolation of resource conservation, fisheries management, market revenue, and cost impacts. Future analysis of employment impacts of ITQ fisheries should comprise one component of a more broad-based integrated review of ITQ programs. Do you agree with that?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. I have one other line of questioning, Mr. Commissioner, and that has to do with MSC certification. And we've had some evidence to deal with that, but if I just may sort of provide a bit, or if you want to cut me off, because you probably know this better than I do, Mr. Morley. But MSC certification refers to the certification by a group called the Marine Stewardship Council, which is an international independent body.
Yes, increasingly, world buyers of fish products are seeking assurances that, particularly the large retail and food service chains, based on pressure from environmental groups and interest from their consumers, are seeking to ensure that the fish products that they're marketing to consumers come from sustainably well-managed fisheries with healthy fish stocks. And that has resulted in the development of a number of certification schemes. The kind of gold standard of an independent third-party certification scheme, which assesses whether or not fisheries are being sustainably managed, is called the Marine Stewardship Council, which is a group headquartered in London, England, and it has certified now is approaching 200 different fisheries worldwide. The British Columbia salmon fishery was one of the first, following on the heels of Alaska achieving certification for its fisheries and looking at our market prospects. The BC salmon fishery said, if we're going to compete with these guys and have our product purchased, we need to have our fisheries assessed and certified as well. The BC Salmon Marketing Council was the original client, which was an organization that represented fishermen and processors, but was funded by a levy on fishermen, and said, we are going to try, with the help of provincial government, to provide us some funding towards it as well, get our salmon fisheries certified. It became a monumental task. We've been at it for 10 years. The client has now changed to the Canadian Pacific Sustainable Fisheries Society, which I am president of, and I've been involved in this process since day one. We have gone through 2 different certifiers, but finally we managed to achieve certification of the BC sockeye fisheries last summer. And this assessment, really, there's 3 principles against which they're trying to assess whether or not a fishery is being managed sustainably. It's not looking at whether the population is going up or down, it's whether or not the management agency, in the face of those kind of changing circumstances, is taking the right action to ensure that they are protecting the underlying health of the population, whether it's managing the fisheries properly. And the assessment really sets scoring criteria against which you have to meet. If you don't meet the scoring criteria at the 60 level, you fail. If you meet above the 80 level, it's a pass with flying colors. If you're between 60 and 80, then you are subject to having a condition imposed in your certification, which says during the 5-year period that your certification is valid for, that you need to develop a way in which you will raise the score on that condition up to over 80. And so what you end up doing is developing, together with the management agency, in this case Department of Fisheries and Oceans, an action plan which will see over the course of that time period you achieving that 80 score by meeting that condition. And there are a very large number of conditions attached to the Fraser sockeye fishery, or the sockeye fishery in BC certification, but these are conditions that are partly related to implementing parts of the wild salmon policy and a number of other factors that will improve the management of the fishery over that time period. And it's a timeline and a commitment that we hopefully will be working with our colleagues in the environmental community to hold Fisheries and Oceans' feet to the fire that they meet, because we, in fact, if we want to maintain access to these markets, then we do need to maintain this certification for sockeye, and we need to expand into other fisheries like pink and chum salmon as well. So that is ongoing, and I think it's again, there's a good cooperative effort to try to implement and meet these conditions that's working. Certainly there's controversy about it. Certainly there's people who want the bar to be set higher, but frankly it's an action plan that those groups haven't been able to achieve on their own without this. And it's really a sign that the marketplace can encourage better management of fisheries, and in so doing provide you access to more customers.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. I have no further questions.
I was just wondering if I could add to the MSC certification
Sure.
comments. I was on the original advisory in designing the certification criteria with the Marine Stewardship Council, where there was a lot of discussion about whether or not the certification would be more on the biological, sustainable end, or include some of the other social economic analysis that needed to be done. And the decision was made, and there was a big portion removed that did include the social economic side of fisheries at that point, prior to starting the first evaluation of fisheries, which were basically the social economic criteria that's in the FAO Code of Conduct on Responsible Fisheries. So the criteria of MSC suits and is designed for a certain purpose. It is not designed for meeting some of the other goals for which we intend to manage fisheries. And since I'm only here for today, and I know my colleague has been here before, and probably there will be lots of opportunity to talk about the Gislison's report, because I'm sure DFO will be putting it forward since they commissioned it. There's a lot of debate on ITQs, and I think throwing up one report and trying to go into it in 15 minutes in detail is really a sort of a really inappropriate kick at the can, because the debate has raged for a long time, and it's gone on in forums that have a lot more depth and time to look into it than this. There's other reports that show exactly the opposite of what Gislison makes, and it always depends on what you're evaluating it against. What you consider a job and employment may vary depending on the individual and the needs of that individual, depending where they live, and how you define a rural community. And if the principle is, I just happen to live at Qualicum Beach, so therefore I live in a rural community, but I'm leasing my license up in Area F, may be very different from a principle of, are you actually fishing within the community where you're delivering, and is that part of the goal, that adjacency type of principle? And just the model that was just shown, 71% of Area F licenses live in rural communities, but there certainly is not 71% of the Area F licenses that are being leased that actually live anywhere near where those fish are being harvested. So it depends on the criteria you apply to some of these reports, and I think what it should be is a demonstration that there is a debate, there is different values that are applied to different reports. Gislison is a very good economist, but I certainly wouldn't put the social sciences as his level of expertise. There's a lot of reports on ITQs done by Memorial University, UVic, people like Rosemary Ulmer, Barbara Neese, and others that need to be brought into the discussion if we're actually going to have the kind of comprehensive understanding of the implications of ITQs, other than just from the pure economic base, as to what they actually mean. And I think that, if anything, if the Cohen Commission is just going to be an avenue, which a lot of us were concerned about, to promote ITQs as a solution to a problem that occurs irregardless of ITQs. Having an ITQ management fishery in the last 10 years would not have made any difference to the survival of BC Fraser River sockeye. All an ITQ will do is provide the determination of who benefits from that fishery. It is selective, and it selects who benefits. It doesn't select fish. Those mechanisms already exist in the regulations. You can braille, you can use all those mechanisms through regulations in your license. What an ITQ does is regulate who benefits from fish.
I have no further questions.
Mr. Tyzik, did you wish to
Oh,
mark
yes,
the Gislison
yes.
report?
Th-
Number
Thank
14
you.
on your list?
Yes, please.
Be marked as 509.
Thank you, Mr. Giles.
Mr. Commissioner, we previously canvassed, or at least raised, the suggestion of having remaining questions addressed by way of written questions, and I'd seek your direction at this point. If you agree that that's an appropriate way to conclude this evidence, my suggestion would be that council who remain on the cross-examination list provide questions in writing by 2 o'clock on Friday to commission. Council will then have a process to have that presented to these witnesses and addressed.
Mr. Commissioner, while I would love to be cooperative on this level, and I will consider it, I do want to raise an issue that the last witness said quite succinctly, that I struggle with, our client struggles within this commission, which is, to what extent do all of the contentious issues in the fisheries become relevant to you today in this hearing? And to what extent do all the details around that contention become irrelevant? Because if ITQs are a relevant matter to your inquiry and you're going to make recommendations or be asked to make recommendations, then we need more time to discuss that, and you need to hear from them much more broadly. And my questions to this panel would not be sufficient to finish that discussion, written or otherwise. And so I really think we need direction from the Commission on some of the detailed issues as to what extent are all of these issues becoming relevant? Because we are obviously running out of time on a regular basis to deal with these in subject matter. And while we're doing our best, I think it becomes almost, well, at best frustrating and at worst concern, raising more and more levels of concern as to whether you're getting the information you will need.
I may not have understood you, Mr. Martland. You are suggesting what takes place on Friday?
The suggestion was following up on the suggestion offered earlier. If the matter is proceeding by way of written questions and responses in writing, they may be by way of an affidavits that are filed, that questions from council with questions to put to these witnesses would be provided to Commission Council by Friday 2 p.m. and will then facilitate that process.
Well, Mr. Martland, in my case, I informed you that a good portion of my process I could carry out by interrogatory, yes. But I still wanted a little bit of viva voce evidence, maybe 5 minutes worth, and then the rest I would do through interrogatories. However, there are other counsel here. I know that Mr. Heiswick wanted an opportunity to examine, so I certainly don't speak for all the other counsel in waiving the opportunity of cross-examination of this panel.
And Mr. Commissioner, that's really, I think we have an issue where we have, as I would identify it, two alternatives. One is to work on identifying a time to bring back this panel for whatever cross-examination remains. The second is to proceed by way of written questions to this panel. I suppose the third meshing of the two would be to do what we can by way of the written questions. If there's still a need to have oral questions posed, that we could then look at having that. But I think those are the alternatives, and I think at this point we'd ask for your direction on that.
Well, what I would first of all, I can say, because I'm sitting here each day looking out over all of you, that you're all trying your best, so there's no argument about that. What I would suggest is this. First of all, those who have questions for this panel would provide Mr. Martland, as he has suggested, by Friday at 2 p.m. with the questions that they feel they can pose to this panel in writing, and Mr. Martland will facilitate working with this panel to provide answers to those questions through an affidavit process. For those who, like Mr. Rosenblum, feel that they would like to elicit some viva voce evidence from this panel, then I would ask Commission Council to work with Mr. Rosenblum and others who may want to have some viva voce testimony elicited to see if we can find, it's going to be extremely difficult. The next 2.5 weeks are very full, to bring this panel back for a short period to accommodate a council who wish to ask a few questions and elicit the answers through viva voce testimony. I would also invite, and I think Ms. Gartner's raised this, if you have any submissions you wish to make along the lines that she just addressed, in other words, with respect to the terms of reference of our commission and the scope and range of the subject matter within which we are attempting to address through documents and through witnesses, then I would invite Ms. Gardner or any council to provide Commission Council with a letter to that effect so that I can have some sense of how she and others may feel about that particular matter she raised. I thank her for raising it, and if she would like to do that, I invite her to do so, and others. So I think the first step, Mr. Rosenblum, is for you and other council who have questions for this panel, if you feel comfortable doing so, that you provide those in writing to Commission Council by 2 p.m. on Friday. If you have a short viva voce cross-examination you would like to conduct, let Mr. Martland know that, and I know he will try his best and work with me to try and accommodate that before we adjourn in March, to see if we can bring, if they're available, members of this panel back for that purpose. We'll do our best to accommodate. Obviously, there are logistical and other challenges to that, Mr. Rosenblum.
My purpose in viva voce was that I felt that my interrogatories were predicated upon very, very brief questions to these witnesses, and upon those responses I would then go by interrogatory. What's being suggested here is the cart before the horse, in that I'm to provide those interrogatories without asking those what I'll call preamble questions. So I'm a little unhappy about
Well,
that.
may I try to make you happy? Which apparently is also in my terms of reference.
I hope you do with the final report too, Mr. Commissioner.
One step at a time, Mr. Rosenberg. You used the word 5 minutes, and if it meant that you could complete between now, I don't know, are you next in line, by the way?
Yes. No, I'm not. Yeah, no, I'm not.
I don't mind giving my space.
There you are. You owe somebody else now as well,
Thank you.
Mr. Rosenberg. So if you could complete, as you suggest, your few questions, which would enable you to decide what questions you might wish to pose in writing, I'm willing to try and accommodate that for you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My first question is to you, Mr. Duncan, and maybe if you be brief with your response, and then if you wish to give a more thorough written response, I will give you the opportunity by way of asking you through an interrogatory. Can you very, very briefly give a history of the Native Brotherhood of British Columbia? I understand you'd like to have that testimony before this hearing.
Would be pleased to. The Native Brotherhood of BC has been around since 1931. It initially started as a northern group, then gradually moved south in the late 40s. And essentially what we are is a union of sorts, but our activities were much more broader. As, for example, in 1949, the Brotherhood was essentially involved with the province, which helped bring Native people the right to vote in this province. That first right was exercised in 1950. So federally, it was 1960 before Indian people got the right to vote. So. We were also involved in education, health, and getting better living conditions at canneries and sort of thing. As far as education was concerned, it's in my father's time, grade 8 was as far as we can go. So I mean, you can see what some of the barriers were, but briefly, that's who we are. We're still around today. We're in our 80th year. And sure, our membership has dropped, but in its heyday, we had between 4,500 and 5,000 members.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Duncan, would you also want me to ask you a question through written form so you could give the Commission even a more detailed history? Would that be in your interest? Or are you satisfied with what's on the record now?
No, we have a little more history than that. It's,
well, I will ask you the question, and then you can, through your counsel, decide what to put before the Commission. Mr. Duncan, in your testimony, you presented a report of 2003 regarding the economic the participation of the First Nations in the commercial fishery. You obviously don't have anything subsequent to 2003, is that correct?
No, there's no other report available.
All right, and I will be asking the Commission through counsel for the Commission to take the initiative to have updated information to bring us into contemporary times in terms of the Native participation, First Nation participation. You also testified, sir, that there was a diminished First Nation presence in the commercial fishery starting around the time of the Pierce Report, then leading to the Mifflin Report. I will be asking you questions as to why that period led to a diminished First Nation participation. You'll be able to answer that through written form, will you?
we can most likely get.
All right, I will be asking you to try to give the commission a background about why through the Pierce period leading to the Mifflin period, it has caused, as a consequence, the diminished First Nation presence in the fishery. And lastly, Mr. Morley, you were asked today in respect to the First Nation involvement, certainly with your company as one processor, in terms of the number of First Nation people, for example, in the canning industry, I believe up at Prince Rupert, I believe your testimony was around 60% at that cannery. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's in excess of probably 65%. Yes.
All right. My question to you, sir, is you're part of a processors association that in fact has received standing as a participant at this inquiry. Are you not?
Yes, the Seafood Producers Association,
Oh,
British Columbia.
right. I think it's important that this commission have a more comprehensive evidentiary base in respect to First Nation participation in the processing side of the industry. If I send through your counsel, and you do have counsel, although he's not present at these hearings day to day, a request for information not just about Canadian Fish Company, but all the processors that make up part of your association. Do you believe that such information can be provided that gives this commission contemporary information in respect to First Nation participation in the processing?
I can certainly pass the request on to the other companies in the association. I can't say how and if they can respond to all of that, but certainly we'll give it our best shot.
All right, and I will thus go by way of interrogatory in respect to that. Mr. Martland, that completes my viva voce evidence, and I will provide questions by Friday, 2 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Commissioner. With the exception of this written process that we've identified, that concludes the commercial evidence. We will begin tomorrow at 10 a.m. with recreational fishing.
I do repeat to you, I'm sorry, but there are other counsel who aren't present today. I know Mr. Eiswick did intend to cross-examine this panel.
Yes, I'm alive to that, and I think I've canvassed that there's been, the preference obviously is to have questions in the conventional form, that we've looked to use a different means of proceeding. I'll speak with Mr. Eiswick. And Ms. Gardner makes the point there is one further commercial witness which I overlooked, Lisa Miazga, on March 15. I think we can be adjourned at this point.
Yeah, yes, I just note that Mr. Lunn does send out his day-end report on what's coming the next day, so all participants will get that this evening, and he could mention in that notice how we concluded this afternoon, so they will know. And I again thank Ms. Gardner for raising her point, and again would with greatest respect invite her, if she wishes to provide that to Commission Counsel, and I thank you for that. And I want to thank Ms. Scarfo, Mr. Duncan, and Mr. Morley. If you come one more time, Mr. Morley, it'll be the Morley Commission. But thank you for returning here so often and for your willingness to participate. And to Mr. Duncan and Mr. Scarfo, thank you very much for making yourselves available today and for your willingness to answer the questions of all the participants who were able to question you today. Thank you and for your willingness to answer questions that are put to you in writing as well. Thank you very much for that. To all three of you, thank you.
Hearing was now adjourned for the day and resume at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.